The churning waters rose without warning in the night, sweeping away Samuel Foster's entire livelihood in mere hours. Standing ankle-deep in mud outside the ruins of his ranch house, he stared hollowly at what remained of 7 years' hard work, splintered timber, drowned cattle, and fields of ruined crops stretching across what had once been the most promising spread in Bandera County, Texas. It was the spring of 1875, and the Medina River had betrayed him. Samuel had built everything from nothing after returning from the war with little more than determination and calloused hands. Now, at 32, he was back where he'd started, except older, more weathered, and dangerously close to surrendering to despair. The flood had taken everything but the clothes on his back, which clung to his skin, still damp from his desperate attempt to save his remaining horses. Only his faithful gelding Thunder had survived, now nervously pawing the ground behind him as though sensing his master's desperation. Samuel ran his fingers through his dark, mud-caked hair. The late April sun beat down on his shoulders, already beginning to dry the land that had been underwater only hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. Too little rain for months, then too much all at once the cruel rhythm of life in this part of Texas. "Mr. Foster?" A voice broke through his thoughts. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Samuel turned to find Hannah Ellis standing a respectful distance away, her honey-blonde hair pulled back beneath a practical bonnet, concern etched across her features. He knew her only in passing, the quiet, capable woman who ran the mercantile store in town since her father's passing 2 years ago. They'd exchanged polite greetings during his infrequent trips for supplies, but little more. "Miss Ellis," he acknowledged with a slight nod, embarrassment flushing his cheeks at being discovered in such a state. His once white shirt was now brown with mud, torn at the shoulder, and his face must have looked as devastated as he felt. "I brought some things," she said, gesturing to the wagon behind her. "Food, blankets, dry clothes. The whole town's talking about what the flood did to the South ranches." Her eyes traveled over the destruction surrounding them. "I had no idea it was this bad." Samuel's pride warred with necessity. He'd never been one to accept charity, but standing amidst the wreckage of his life, he found himself without the luxury of refusal. "That's mighty kind of you," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Hannah stepped closer, seemingly unbothered by the mud that immediately claimed her boots. "You saved 3 of the Wilkins children when their home washed away 2 years back. Folks don't forget that kind of courage, Mr. Foster." Samuel had almost forgotten that night himself, riding into raging waters to reach the stranded family. He hadn't considered it particularly brave, just necessary. "Well, I appreciate it all the same." He glanced at Thunder, the only surviving member of his once impressive stable. "Though I'm not sure there's much point in staying. Nothing left to save." Hannah's expression hardened slightly. "There's always something worth saving, Mr. Foster." She turned back toward her wagon. "At the very least, you can get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Then we can figure out the rest." Something in her practical determination stirred a response in Samuel's chest, the faintest flicker of something he'd thought the flood had extinguished completely. Hope. Little did he know that the woman offering him dry clothes would soon give him reason to rebuild what the waters had washed away, and more than he'd ever had before. Hannah didn't wait for his response before marching back to her wagon and retrieving a bundle wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, giving Samuel the distinct impression that arguing would be futile. "These were my father's," she explained, handing over the package. "He was about your build, I think. Not much, but they're clean and dry." Samuel accepted the bundle awkwardly. "I'll pay you back for this, Miss Ellis, once I figure things out." Hannah brushed away his promise with a wave of her hand. "There's a creek just beyond that stand of cottonwoods, clean enough for washing up." She pointed to the east. "I'll wait here." Samuel hesitated, but the growing discomfort of his mud-caked clothing made the decision for him. With a nod of thanks, he took the bundle and trudged toward the cottonwoods, leading Thunder behind him. The creek water was cool and clear, having already settled from the turbulence of the flood. Samuel stripped off his ruined clothes and scrubbed the worst of the mud from his skin and hair, feeling somewhat human again despite everything. The clothes, Hannah had brought a sturdy cotton shirt, denim trousers, and even a pair of wool socks fit well enough. The simple act of changing into dry garments lifted his spirits marginally, though the weight of his losses still pressed heavily upon him. When he returned to the ruins of his ranch house, Hannah had been busy. She'd cleared a small area of debris and set up a makeshift camp. A canvas tarp stretched between two broken fence posts provided shade, and beneath it she'd arranged a small crate as a table with provisions laid out. "You didn't need to do all this," Samuel said, genuinely surprised by her efforts. Hannah looked up from where she was pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Seemed practical. You need to eat, and we need to talk about what comes next." "Next?" Samuel's voice held a note of bitter amusement. "Miss Ellis, I appreciate your kindness more than I can say. But there is no next for this place. The house is gone, the barn's demolished, my cattle are either dead or scattered halfway to Mexico by now." Hannah handed him the coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "Mr. Foster, I've lived in Bandera all my life. I've seen floods, droughts, and everything in between. People rebuild." "With what?" "I sank everything I had into this land," Samuel said, gesturing around them with his free hand. "The bank in San Antonio holds the mortgage, and I was already behind on payments before the river decided to claim what was left." Hannah's blue eyes studied him with surprising intensity. "I'm not suggesting it will be easy, but you have options that you're too exhausted and discouraged to see right now." Samuel took a long sip of the strong, hot coffee. It was better than anything he'd made for himself in recent memory. "Such as?" "For starters, the widow Jenkins has been looking for someone to help restore her late husband's ranch. She can't pay much, but there's a cabin on the property where you could stay. It would give you time to get back on your feet." Samuel's pride bristled. "I'm not looking for charity work." Hannah's patience visibly thinned. "It's honest work that needs doing, not charity. Catherine Jenkins is 70 years old and can't manage that property herself, no matter how stubborn she is about admitting it." She paused, then added more gently, "The alternative is riding away from everything you've built here and starting over somewhere else. Is that really what you want?" The question hung between them as Samuel considered his options, few as they were. He'd chosen this land specifically for its rich soil and access to water. Ironically enough now, he knew every inch of it, had plans for expansion that had occupied his dreams for years. The thought of abandoning it entirely left a hollow feeling in his chest. "I'll think on it," he finally said, which was more commitment than he'd expected to give moments earlier. Hannah seemed satisfied with this concession. "Good. Now eat something before you fall over." She'd brought bread, dried beef, and apples, simple fare but nourishing. They ate in companionable silence as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Samuel found himself studying Hannah when she wasn't looking. He'd never paid her much mind before, seeing her only as the capable shopkeeper who'd taken over her father's business. Now, he noticed the determination in her jaw, the kindness in her eyes, the confidence in her movements. "Why are you doing this?" he asked suddenly. Hannah looked up, seemingly taken aback by the directness of his question. "Doing what?" "This." Samuel gestured at the makeshift camp, the food, the clothes he now wore. "You barely know me." "I know enough," she replied simply. "I know you work harder than most men in the county. I know you helped the Miller family when their youngest had the fever last winter. I know you've turned this place from scrubland to something worth envying." She paused, looking out over the mud-covered fields. "And I know what it's like to lose everything and have to decide whether to stay or go." The personal admission caught Samuel by surprise. Hannah Ellis had always seemed the picture of stability to him, the steady presence behind the counter at the mercantile, efficiently managing the business her father had built. "Your father's passing?" he ventured. Hannah nodded. "That, and other things." She didn't elaborate, and Samuel didn't press. The point is, sometimes people need a moment's help to see their way forward. That's all I'm offering. As the sun sank lower, painting the devastated landscape in soft golden light, Samuel found himself wondering if there might indeed be a way forward here, one he couldn't yet see through his exhaustion and despair. "I should get back to town before dark," Hannah said, beginning to pack up the remains of their meal. "Will you be all right out here tonight?" Samuel nodded. "I've slept rough before. The weather's mild enough." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Miss Ellis, truly." "Hannah," she corrected with a small smile. "If you're wearing my father's clothes, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Hannah," he repeated, the name feeling strangely right on his lips. "Then I'm Samuel." "Samuel," she nodded. "I'll return tomorrow with more supplies if that's all right. Perhaps we can salvage some things from the house." As he watched her climb onto her wagon and turn back toward town, Samuel felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its precursor. The will to face another day. That night, Samuel slept beneath the stars, thunder tethered nearby, using one of Hannah's blankets for comfort. Despite his losses, despite the uncertainty of his future, he slept more soundly than he had in months. His dreams untouched by the worries that had plagued him since the war. Morning brought both clarity and the promised return of Hannah Ellis. She arrived just after sunrise, her wagon loaded with tools, more provisions, and determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a stove. "I hope you're ready to work," she called as she approached, already rolling up her sleeves. Samuel had been awake for hours, taking stock of the damage in the harsh light of day. It was, if anything, worse than he'd initially assessed. Yet somehow, Hannah's arrival bolstered his resolve. "Always am," he replied, moving to help her with the wagon. They spent that day sorting through the wreckage of the ranch house. Much was beyond salvation, but they managed to recover some tools, cookware, and surprisingly, a wooden chest containing Samuel's important papers, including his deed to the land. The chest had floated and lodged itself against what remained of the stone chimney, its contents mostly dry thanks to the tight craftsmanship. "Providence," Hannah declared when they discovered it. Samuel wasn't so sure about divine intervention, but he was grateful nonetheless. By midday, they had organized the salvageable items and cleared much of the debris from what had been the main room of the house. "The foundation's still solid," Hannah observed, kicking at the stone base that had survived the floodwaters. "You could rebuild right here." Samuel wiped sweat from his brow. "With what money, Hannah?" "I wasn't exaggerating about my situation." Hannah sat down on a recovered chair, one of the few pieces of furniture that hadn't been washed away or destroyed. "Have you considered a loan?" "Already in debt to the bank in San Antonio," Samuel reminded her. "They're not likely to extend more credit after this disaster." "Not them," Hannah said. "I meant from me." Samuel stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "From you?" Hannah met his gaze steadily. "My father was cautious with money. When he passed, I found he'd set aside more than I realized over the years. The store does well enough, and I live simply." She spoke matter-of-factly, without embarrassment or pride. "I've been looking for an investment opportunity, something more substantial than just letting the money sit in the bank." "You want to invest in this?" Samuel gestured incredulously at the devastation surrounding them. "I want to invest in you," Hannah corrected. "From a business perspective, it makes sense. You know ranching, you know this land, and you've already proven you can make it profitable. The flood was an unfortunate setback, but the underlying value remains." Samuel shook his head in disbelief. "You're talking as if this is just a business transaction." "It would be," Hannah replied firmly, "with proper terms, interest, and repayment schedules. I'm not offering charity, Samuel. I'm offering a partnership." The proposal left Samuel speechless. He'd never considered such an arrangement, especially not with a woman he barely knew before yesterday. Yet Hannah Ellis had shown more faith in him and his ranch in one day than the bank had in 7 years of doing business with him. "I need time to think," he finally said. Hannah nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Of course. It's not a decision to make lightly. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. In the meantime, we should continue salvaging what we can. They worked until dusk, speaking little but accomplishing much. By the time Hannah needed to return to town, they had recovered enough to establish a more comfortable camp for Samuel, including a canvas tent she'd brought from town. "I'll return in 2 days," Hannah said as she prepared to leave. "I need to mind the store tomorrow. Think about my offer, Samuel." After she departed, Samuel sat beside a small fire, turning over Hannah's proposition in his mind. The practical part of him recognized the sense in it with capital. He could rebuild quickly, perhaps even in time to plant a late crop and begin restocking his herd before winter. The proud part of him balked at the idea of being indebted to someone else, especially a woman he was just beginning to know. Yet there was something about Hannah Ellis that inspired confidence. She was clear-headed, practical, and forthright. If she believed his ranch was a sound investment, perhaps she saw something he couldn't in his current state of despondency. 2 days later, when Hannah returned as promised, Samuel had made his decision. "I accept your offer," he said without preamble as she climbed down from her wagon. "But I want everything in writing, and I'll pay fair interest." Hannah's face brightened with a smile that transformed her features from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "I already drew up the papers," she admitted, pulling a folded document from her bag. "Just in case you said yes." Samuel couldn't help but laugh, the first real laugh since before the flood. "You were that certain?" "I was hopeful," Hannah corrected, her eyes twinkling. "There's a difference." That afternoon, they signed the agreement, witnessed by Judge Thornton, who had ridden out from town with Hannah specifically for this purpose. The terms were straightforward and fair. Hannah would provide the capital needed to rebuild the ranch house, barn, and purchase new livestock. Samuel would repay the loan over 5 years with reasonable interest. If he defaulted, Hannah would become part owner of the ranch rather than foreclosing entirely. "A much more equitable arrangement than you'd get from any bank," the judge commented after reading through the document. With the agreement signed and the judge departed, Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since the flood, he allowed himself to look forward rather than backward. "Where do we start?" Hannah asked, rolling up the signed papers and storing them carefully in her bag. "We," Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I'm invested in this ranch now," Hannah reminded him with a practical smile, "both financially and otherwise." The otherwise hung in the air between them, undefined but impossible to ignore. Samuel cleared his throat and gestured toward what remained of the barn. "We start by clearing the rest of the debris, then rebuilding the barn. We'll need somewhere to house livestock before winter comes." Hannah nodded. "I can help on weekends and some evenings. The store keeps me busy, but I'll send word to the Mendez brothers they're looking for work, and they're good builders." For the next several weeks, the Foster Ranch became a center of activity. True to her word, Hannah arranged for the Mendez brothers to assist with reconstruction, and several other townspeople volunteered their time as well. Samuel was initially uncomfortable with the help, until Hannah pointed out that he'd done the same for others in their times of need. "Communities survive by supporting each other," she told him as they worked side by side, installing support beams in the new barn. "Your turn to receive rather than give, that's all." By mid-June, the barn was completed, larger and sturdier than its predecessor, and work had begun on the ranch house. Samuel temporarily moved into a small room at the back of the barn, a significant improvement over the tent he'd been using. With Hannah's investment, he'd also purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 new horses to join Thunder. Hannah visited the ranch almost daily, despite her responsibilities at the mercantile. She would arrive in the early evening, often bringing dinner and staying to help with whatever task was underway. Their conversations, initially focused on practical matters of reconstruction, gradually expanded to include their pasts, their hopes, and their views on everything from politics to literature. Samuel learned that Hannah had been engaged once to a man who'd gone to fight in the war and never returned. She'd received word of his death at Gettysburg and had dedicated herself to helping her father with the store afterward. "I never expected to find that kind of connection again," she admitted one evening as they sat on makeshift chairs outside the half-built house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Samuel, who had fought at Gettysburg himself but been lucky enough to return, felt a pang of something like survivor's guilt. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Hannah shook her head. "It was a long time ago. Life continues." She looked over at him with a gentle smile. "What about you? No wife waiting somewhere when you claimed this land?" Samuel chuckled without humor. "No, the war changed me. Took a while to find my footing afterward." He paused, considering how much to share. "Truth is, I came to Bandera to be alone. Figured ranching was something I could do without having to talk much to anyone." "How's that working out for you?" Hannah asked with a teasing lilt to her voice. Samuel looked around at the evidence of community support surrounding them, the barn raised with the help of neighbors, the house being built by willing hands, and most of all, the woman sitting beside him who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. "Not exactly as planned," he admitted with a genuine smile. As July gave way to August, the ranch house neared completion. It was smaller than the original, but better designed and more solidly built. Samuel found himself incorporating suggestions from Hannah: more windows to catch the breeze, a larger kitchen with built-in shelving, a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the structure. "Planning to do a lot of sitting out here?" he asked one day as they worked on the porch railing. Hannah wiped perspiration from her forehead, leaving a smudge of sawdust behind. "Best place to watch the sunset," she replied. "Besides, every proper Texas home needs a good porch." Samuel found himself watching her more and more as the days passed, the way she tackled every task with determination, how she could negotiate with suppliers to get fair prices, her unexpected strength when it came to physical labor. She was unlike any woman he'd known before, combining practical capability with genuine warmth. For her part, Hannah seemed equally attentive to him. She noticed when he was pushing himself too hard and would insist he take breaks. She remembered how he preferred his coffee and would have a cup waiting when he came in from early morning work with the cattle. She laughed at his dry humor and challenged his occasional bouts of pessimism. It was during one such challenge that something between them shifted. "The well's running low again," Samuel reported one evening in late August as they sat on the newly completed porch. "If we don't get rain soon, we'll be hauling water from the creek by October." Hannah sighed. "Always looking for the cloud around the silver lining, aren't you?" "Being realistic," Samuel countered. "No, you're being afraid," Hannah said, her directness catching him off guard. "Afraid to acknowledge how much you've accomplished in such a short time, because then you'd have to admit things might actually turn out well." Samuel stared at her, momentarily speechless. "That's not—" "It is," Hannah interrupted. "I've watched you these past months, Samuel Foster. You work as if your life depends on it. You're kind to those who help you. You're clever and resourceful, but you refuse to believe that good things can last." She leaned forward in her chair. "I understand why. The war, the flood, life's taught you that everything can be taken away in an instant." Her insight was so accurate, it left him feeling exposed. "And you think that's wrong?" he asked quietly. "I think it's no way to live," Hannah replied, her voice gentler now. "Always waiting for the next disaster instead of appreciating what you have right in front of you." Their eyes met and held in the fading light. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of what had been growing these past months. Carefully untended, but flourishing nonetheless. "Hannah," Samuel began, not entirely sure what he intended to say. She saved him from having to decide by standing abruptly. "It's getting late. I should head back to town." Samuel rose as well, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I'll saddle your horse." As he helped her mount, their hands touched briefly, sending an unexpected current through him. Hannah looked down at him, her expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "The house is nearly finished," she observed. "You'll be moving in soon." "Next week, probably," Samuel confirmed. Hannah nodded. You should have a proper housewarming. Invite the people who helped rebuild. She paused. It would be good for them to see what they've contributed to. Would you help me organize it? Samuel asked, surprising himself with the request. Social gatherings had never been his forte. Hannah's smile returned. I'd be delighted to. As she rode away, Samuel remained standing in the yard long after her figure had disappeared down the road. Hannah Ellis had become far more than a business partner or even a friend. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. The housewarming was scheduled for the second Saturday in September. Hannah threw herself into the preparations with characteristic energy, helping Samuel arrange for food, drinks, and even some simple decorations. The Mendez brothers offered to provide music, and several town ladies promised to bring dishes to supplement the meal. The night before the gathering, Samuel found himself alone in his nearly furnished house for the first time. The bed was new, the sheets clean and crisp. The main room boasted a sturdy table with chairs, a small sofa near the fireplace, and shelves filled with books, some salvaged, others gifts from Hannah, who shared his love of reading. It was comfortable, practical, and infinitely more than he'd had 3 months ago. Yet as he wandered from room to room, he felt a strange emptiness he couldn't immediately identify. Only when he stepped onto the porch and gazed out at the land that was recovering as surely as he was did he understand. The house didn't feel like a home yet, because home had become something different to him now. Home was the sound of Hannah's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the feeling of working alongside her toward something meaningful. The realization kept him awake far into the night. The housewarming was by any measure a success. Nearly 30 people arrived throughout the afternoon, bearing gifts, food, and genuine goodwill. Judge Thornton brought a fine bottle of whiskey. The widow Jenkins contributed a handmade quilt. The mercantile's clerk, who had been managing the store to allow Hannah more time at the ranch, presented Samuel with a new set of leather work gloves. Hannah moved through the gathering with easy grace, ensuring everyone had food and drink, introducing people who didn't know each other well, making sure Samuel wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her eyes and had arranged her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. Samuel found himself watching her whenever she wasn't looking, struck by how naturally she fit into the home they had essentially built together. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Hannah remained to help with the cleanup. They worked in companionable silence, washing dishes and putting away leftover food. When the last cup was dried and the floor swept, they found themselves alone in the quiet house. "Thank you," Samuel said, leaning against the kitchen counter, "for everything, not just today." Hannah smiled, though there was a hint of something wistful in her expression. "It was a lovely gathering. You've made quite an impression on Bandera, Samuel Foster." "That's more your doing than mine," he replied honestly. "You're the one who convinced everyone I was worth helping." "You've always been worth helping," Hannah said quietly. I just reminded them of that fact. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with words unsaid. Hannah was the first to break it, moving toward the door. "I should go. It's getting late." "Stay," Samuel said, the word escaping before he could consider its implications. Hannah paused, her hand on the door latch. "What?" Samuel crossed the room to stand before her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I don't mean—" He shook his head, frustrated by his inability to express himself clearly. When you're not here, the house doesn't feel right. Nothing feels right." Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "Samuel, I know it hasn't been that long," he continued hurriedly, "and maybe this is too soon or completely unwelcome, but these past months, working with you, talking with you, I've never known anyone like you." "Hannah." A smile began to form on Hannah's lips. "Is this your roundabout way of saying you have feelings for me, Samuel Foster?" The directness that he'd come to admire so much in her broke through his awkwardness. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." Hannah's smile bloomed fully then. "Good, because I have feelings for you as well." The admission, plainly stated yet profoundly meaningful, lifted a weight from Samuel's shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly. "I'm not good with words," he admitted, "but I know that meeting you even under the worst circumstances of my life was the best thing that's ever happened to me." Hannah stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest against his chest. "You're better with words than you think." Her gaze was warm and steady. "And for the record, I'm very glad I brought you those dry clothes." Samuel couldn't help but laugh at the reminder of their first meeting him, standing in the mud of his ruined ranch, her offering the simple kindness that had been the first step on this unexpected journey. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. In answer, Hannah rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Samuel's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless. "I should still go," Hannah whispered, though she made no move to leave his embrace. Samuel nodded reluctantly. "I know. Your reputation." Hannah pressed a finger to his lips. "I wasn't thinking of my reputation. I was thinking that some things are worth waiting for." Her eyes held a promise that made his heart race. "But I will expect to be properly courted, Mr. Foster." Samuel smiled. "I believe that can be arranged, Miss Ellis." He walked her to her horse, helped her mount, and stood watching as she rode away, turning once to wave before disappearing into the gathering darkness. The house behind him no longer felt empty. It was filled with possibility, now the possibility of a future he hadn't dared imagine when Hannah first found him standing in the ruins of his old life. The courtship of Hannah Ellis was unlike anything Samuel had ever experienced. Having established their mutual feelings, they now had the pleasure of exploring them deliberately, learning each other in ways that went beyond their initial partnership. Samuel began by calling at the mercantile at the end of each day, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers he'd picked along the way, a particularly perfect peach from his newly planted orchard, or once, a kitten he'd rescued from a hollow log who now resided happily in the store as a mouser. Hannah, for her part, continued to visit the ranch regularly, though now their work was punctuated by stolen kisses and long conversations about their hopes for the future. She introduced Samuel to her small circle of friends in town, including the formidable widow Jenkins, who approved of him primarily because he knows how to listen to a sensible woman. As September gave way to October and the ranch continued to recover and improve, Samuel found himself thinking more and more about making their arrangement permanent. He knew it was soon. They'd known each other barely 6 months, but he had never been more certain of anything in his life. The opportunity to propose came unexpectedly during an afternoon ride along the western boundary of his property. They had packed a small picnic and were enjoying the mild autumn weather, seated beneath a large oak tree that offered views across the rolling Texas landscape. "I've been thinking," Hannah said, absently running her fingers through the grass beside their blanket, "about our financial arrangement." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Our loan agreement? Is there a problem?" Hannah shook her head. "Not a problem, but I've been considering a modification to the terms." "What kind of modification?" Samuel asked, curious about her serious tone. Hannah met his gaze directly. "I was thinking we might convert it from a loan to a joint investment permanently." Samuel's heart skipped a beat as he began to understand her meaning. "Are you proposing a different kind of partnership, Miss Ellis?" A smile played at the corners of Hannah's mouth. "I might be, though I believe it's traditionally the gentleman who does the proposing in these situations." Samuel took her hand in his, suddenly certain that this moment, unplanned as it was exactly right. "Hannah Ellis, you found me at my lowest point and saw something worth salvaging. You've brought light and hope back into my life when I thought both were gone forever." He paused, overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Hannah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Yes," she said simply. "I would love nothing more than to be your wife, Samuel Foster." Their kiss sealed the promise, sweet and tender beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree. When they finally broke apart, Samuel couldn't stop grinning. "I don't have a ring," he realized suddenly. Hannah laughed. "We can worry about that later." She looked around at the ranch lands surrounding them. "This is worth more than any ring to me, building something lasting together." They rode back to the ranch house hand in hand, making plans for their future. They would marry before Christmas, they decided. The store could be managed by Hannah's capable clerk, allowing her to split her time between the mercantile and the ranch. The house Samuel had just finished would become their home together. "We should add another bedroom," Hannah suggested as they dismounted in front of the house, "for the future." The implication made Samuel's heart swell with joy. "How many bedrooms do you think we'll need?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. Hannah's eyes danced with amusement. "Let's start with one additional and see what happens." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Bandera. Most received it with enthusiasm and congratulations, though a few expressed surprise at the speed of their courtship. Judge Thornton merely chuckled when they told him. "Saw this coming months ago," he declared. "About time you two figured it out yourselves." The wedding was set for December 18th to be held in the small church in town, with a celebration afterward at the ranch. Hannah threw herself into the preparations with characteristic efficiency, while Samuel focused on ensuring the ranch would be ready for winter and their new life together. One evening in late November, as they sat before the fireplace in what would soon be their home, Samuel broached a subject he'd been considering for some time. "I've been thinking about the ranch name," he said as Hannah leaned against his shoulder, both of them watching the flames dance. "It needs a proper one now." "What did you have in mind?" Hannah asked. Samuel smiled. "How about Second Chance Ranch? Seems fitting, considering everything." Hannah considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I like it. Though it's more like a third or fourth chance for both of us, isn't it?" Samuel kissed the top of her head. "All that matters is it's the last chance we'll need." Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a crisp December sky the color of Hannah's eyes. The small church in Bandera was filled to capacity, decorated with evergreens and red ribbons for both the season and the occasion. Samuel stood at the altar, more nervous than he'd been facing Confederate artillery, wearing a new black suit Hannah had insisted on ordering from San Antonio. When the church doors opened and Hannah appeared on the arm of Judge Thornton, standing in for her father, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with her honey blonde hair arranged in soft waves beneath a short veil. But it was her smile, radiant and sure, that truly took his breath away. As she walked toward him, Samuel felt a certainty settle in his heart. This woman, this moment, was what he had been moving toward his entire life, even when he didn't know it. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows and rings. Samuel had indeed found a lovely gold band in time, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a promise and a fulfillment. The celebration at Second Chance Ranch lasted well into the evening. The house was filled with music, laughter, and more good wishes than Samuel had received in all his years before meeting Hannah. When the last guests had departed and they were finally alone, husband and wife, Samuel took Hannah's hands in his. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," he said softly. Hannah's eyes shone with happiness. "It's been home since the day I found you standing in the mud, Samuel. I just didn't know it yet." Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Winter was harsh, testing the new structures and Samuel's rebuilding efforts. Spring brought welcome rains gentler than the flood that had brought them together, and the land responded with abundant growth. By summer, the ranch was thriving again, with healthy cattle, productive fields, and an orchard beginning to bear its first fruit. Hannah continued to divide her time between the ranch and the mercantile, though she hired additional help at the store to allow more time at home. She took to ranching with the same determination she applied to everything, learning quickly and contributing ideas that improved their operation. Together, they made an effective team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. In August, just as they were preparing to celebrate 1 year since the completion of their home, Hannah shared news that would change their lives once more. "Samuel," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as she had envisioned when insisting on its construction, "I have something to tell you." There was something in her voice that made Samuel turn to look at her fully. "What is it?" Hannah took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We'll need to finish that additional bedroom sooner rather than later." For a moment, Samuel couldn't speak, overcome with emotion. Then he was on his knees before her chair, his arms encircling her waist, his cheek pressed against the place where their child was growing. "A baby," he whispered. "Oh, Hannah." She stroked his hair. Her own eyes filled with happy tears. "Due in February, the doctor says." Samuel looked up at her, overwhelmed with love for this woman who had brought so much into his life. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him, leaning down to kiss him softly. The coming months were filled with preparations. Samuel completed the additional bedroom with help from the Mendez brothers. Hannah began crafting tiny garments in the evenings, and they spent countless hours discussing names and making plans for their expanding family. Winter arrived early that year, with a December that brought snow to Bandera for the first time in nearly a decade. As Christmas approached, Hannah's condition became more pronounced, her belly rounding beneath her dresses in a way that Samuel found endlessly fascinating. "She's active today," Hannah commented on Christmas Eve as they lay in bed, Samuel's hand resting on the swell of her stomach, feeling the movements of their child. "She?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You sound certain." Hannah smiled mysteriously. "Just a feeling." They had decorated a small pine tree in the corner of their main room and exchanged simple gifts by its light. Hannah gave Samuel a new saddle she'd secretly commissioned months before, while he presented her with a music box he'd ordered from San Antonio that played her favorite melody. But their greatest gift awaited them in the new year. On February 10th, 1877, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor attended by the town doctor and 2 neighboring women, Hannah gave birth to a healthy son. "Not a girl after all," she said tiredly but happily, as Samuel held their newborn for the first time, marveling at his tiny features and the shock of dark hair that matched his own. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, overcome with awe and gratitude. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed various names throughout Hannah's pregnancy, but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking down at their son's face, Hannah said with certainty, "Matthew. It means gift from God." "Matthew Ellis Foster," Samuel agreed, carefully returning the baby to Hannah's arms. "Welcome to Second Chance Ranch, son." As he watched his wife and child together, Samuel reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than 2 years ago, he had stood in the mud of his destroyed ranch, believing he had lost everything worth having. Now, he possessed riches beyond anything he could have imagined, not measured in cattle or acres, but in love and family and hope for the future. The years that followed brought more blessings and occasional hardships. Matthew grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's sharp intelligence. When he was 3, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, whose arrival during a spring thunderstorm seemed fitting for a child who would grow up to be as forceful and unpredictable as the Texas weather. The ranch prospered under Samuel and Hannah's joint stewardship. They expanded their cattle operation, added sheep at Hannah's insistence, and established one of the first apple orchards in the county. The mercantile in town continued to thrive as well, eventually managed primarily by Hannah's former clerk who bought into the business as a partner, allowing Hannah to focus more on her family and the ranch. On the 10th anniversary of the flood that had destroyed Samuel's original ranch house, he and Hannah stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog. Matthew, now 9, was teaching Elizabeth to throw a lasso, using a fence post as their target. Their laughter carried on the spring breeze, a sound that never failed to fill Samuel's heart with joy. Do you ever think about that day? Hannah asked softly, leaning against his shoulder. When I found you standing in the mud? Samuel slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. More often than you might expect. It was both the worst and best day of my life. Hannah looked up at him, the years having added only character to her beauty. The best? Really? It was the day I met you, Samuel explained simply, the day everything really began. Hannah smiled, the same smile that had first kindled hope in his despairing heart a decade earlier. Who would have thought that a pair of dry clothes could lead to all this? Not me, Samuel admitted. I was too busy feeling sorry for myself to see the possibilities. And now? Hannah asked, gesturing toward their thriving ranch, their beautiful home, their wonderful children. Samuel turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Now I see possibilities everywhere I look, and they all begin and end with you, Hannah Foster. Their kiss was interrupted by the children's shouts for attention as Elizabeth finally managed to loop her small lasso over the fence post. Samuel and Hannah broke apart, laughing, and moved down the porch steps to join their family in celebration of this small triumph. As the sun began to set over Second Chance Ranch, painting the sky in the brilliant hues that Hannah had envisioned when insisting on their wraparound porch, Samuel Foster reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. From the depths of loss to the heights of joy, from standing alone in the mud to being surrounded by a family he adored, all because a kind-hearted woman had offered him dry clothes and, more importantly, belief in a future worth building. It was, he decided, as he watched his wife demonstrate proper lasso technique to their daughter, the most valuable lesson he'd ever learned, that even in the darkest moments, when everything seemed lost, the seed of something beautiful might be taking root if only you had the courage to nurture it.